Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
If you know me at all, you know that I have a deep and strong connection to Israel. My father immigrated when he was a toddler, as many of you know. He grew up as a Zionist, helping to smuggle refugees from the Holocaust into pre-Israel Palestine. And by the time he was a teenager, he fought in the Israeli War of Independence. I myself have felt this connection. When I was young, I was a little awkward with myself, and I sometimes said to my parents, why did you name me Adina? Why couldn't you give me a name like Karen or Debbie? And when I was a preteen, I was in Israel, and I was with a group of teenagers, and this Israeli teenager, a few years older than me, who I thought was pretty cute, heard my name, and he said, Adina, I love the name Adina. What a magnificent name. And I thought, I really love this country. In the past couple decades, before my father's death, he became disillusioned and disappointed with the direction that the Israeli government was taking. And I, too, absorbed that disillusion and disappointment. Knowing that, my good friend Janine Freer, who is here and has been involved with the New Israel Fund, NIF, for years, had been trying to rope me in. And I kept saying, not until I'm done being president of Beth Am, that's coming up. And sure enough, the day after I finished my term, Janine called me and reminded me. So I became involved, and I got interested in this annual New Israel Fund trip to Israel to meet with civil society in Israel, a group of people trying to keep Israel democratic and promote an egalitarian, just society. And then October 7th happened. I was so truly wrecked. I was actually not functioning for 2 weeks. My oldest daughter called to check in on me every day. And it felt in that moment that criticizing Israel in any way was difficult. Over time, I was able to reconcile the criticism of Israel, of wanting it to be its best self, is patriotic, and I decided to go on the NIF trip. This week's Torah portion, as mentioned, involves Moses sending 12 spies into the Promised Land to come back and report. I guess I did see my role as sort of going and checking out things, if only for myself. But people from NIF asked me to talk about what happened and what I saw when I came back. I thought the spy part wasn't that applicable, but then as I was thinking about my remarks here, I thought, before I left, people would ask me, oh, you're going to Israel, are you going with your synagogue? And I would say, no, I'm going with another group. People I thought who would be disappointed that I was going with a group, an association that could be critical in any way of Israel. Oh, I'm just going with an organization. So in that sense, I felt a little affinity to being a spy. When I was trying to think about what I wanted to share today, I was kind of frustrated, very frustrated actually. As I just told Janine, I wrote down just the barest minimum of notes that I wanted to share and realized it would take an hour. So I'm going to skip the parts about the fascinating think tanks that are coming up with creative solutions for peaceful coexistence, the social media platforms aimed at debunking fake news, the work of the Hostage Forum, the anti-war protests, the overlay of having hostages held right now in this very difficult time in Israel. And I'll hopefully be able to talk about more of that later with Diane Garbstein, who was also on the trip and has unique perspectives based on her experience. And I'm going to talk about just a few moments that really impacted me emotionally. Frankly, I'm going to tell you what my mother told me to tell you, because she's always right. So I'm going to share some of the emotional experience I had, how I processed that, and I hope that it resonates with you. I'll start with a particularly moving day for me, our trip to the West Bank. We were on a tour with Breaking the Silence, which is a group of former Israeli Defense Force soldiers, IDF soldiers, who document human rights abuses against Palestinians. We went to the West Bank and started our day in the Hebron Hills. Now, most of you know there's different types of settlements in the West Bank. They're the settlements, all of them violate international law. Some of them are sanctioned by the Israeli government. They tend to be the closest ones to Jerusalem. Others are not even sanctioned by the Israeli government. They're mostly ultra-nationalist Zionists who form these outposts deeper into the West Bank. And although not sanctioned to the Israeli government, somehow they end up with paved roads, electricity, and water. We started just the first moments of our day looking out at this outpost settlement. And immediately, one of the ultra-nationalist settlers showed up, and he was raving mad. He was so angry. He was just spewing invective at us and got so close to us. There were a group of 20-something of us, right in our face, and I had never experienced so much hate up close and personally. He said that we loved baby killers, and that we loved murderers, and that we hated Jews, and he just wouldn't stop. He had a gun in his waistband, and he circled us, and our guide told us he would not hurt us, but I have to tell you, I was just so disturbed. I happened to be wearing sunglasses that day, which I failed to wear as often as I should for the sake of my eyes, and I was glad, because behind them, I was crying. Tears were just running down my face. I wasn't comfortable with him, and I started to imagine what it would be like to be a lone Palestinian shepherd walking the fields with this person threatening so close in his face and maybe doing more. Interestingly, and I won't have time here, but hopefully afterwards to talk about the relationship between the IDF and the settlers, that's an interesting topic too. This settler called the IDF, the local IDF, to show up, and the IDF soldiers showed up, and within moments we learned they had a warrant, I forget the name of the warrant, but was to prevent us from traveling to other villages in the West Bank that day. As an example of the incredible sort of orchestrated concert of civil society in Israel, I shared that our guide from Breaking the Silence got on WhatsApp, and in record-breaking time, somewhere a lawyer had the warrant lifted. And so we were on our way. There were more travails during the day, and we actually ended up not allowed to go to any of the villages. Most disappointingly for us was we were going to visit a Palestinian home, and the Palestinian family was going to host us for lunch and share their experiences living in the West Bank. Undeterred, they schlepped large pots of delicious food over the fields and to the road, and hosted us by the side of the road while we sat on large rocks on the dirt or stood and ate the food while they explained what their life was like and how hard it was in the West Bank. Right there, we could see, right next to their home, large boulders in their driveway that settlers had put there, driveway being a very rough sort of dirt road, that settlers had put there to keep them from being able to go in and out of their homes. We saw a small Palestinian school where settlers had often come and just moved things around to show their presence, and planted in this Palestinian school their Israeli flags to show who's boss. On the subject of vulnerable populations, we also visited a Bedouin community in the Negev. The Bedouins, for anybody who doesn't know, are a nomadic Arabic-speaking tribe, and they have long ties to the land in the desert in various countries, including Israel. Some of them live in recognized villages. These are villages set up by the Israeli government. Often Bedouin have been moved from their historic land and they're living there. And those villages are very primitive, but they do have water, electricity, and significantly shelters, bomb shelters. They're in southern Israel. The unrecognized villages where Bedouins live in their historic homes, to which they're very, very attached, don't have water, don't have electricity, and significantly don't have shelters. Many of the Bedouins in southern Israel, many of them tried to help Israelis on October 7th. Many were killed because they were completely unprotected. We were particularly focusing on one village, and we met with a Bedouin who is part of civil society, working with NIF and Shatil, which is the arm in Israel, and he showed us around, and we were focusing on a village that was forced to move. The Israeli government had given this village an order to move to a recognized village, one of the Bedouin recognized villages. This Bedouin community said, okay, we're willing to move, but we can't move to that village. The reason that the Israeli government was ordering them to move is because they wanted to continue a road through the Negev through this village. I think it was Route 6, do you remember? Anyway, so the Bedouin community is willing to move, but they say we can't move to that village because those Bedouins don't want us. It's an untenable situation. We cannot live like that. Please give us an alternative, even though they didn't want to leave their historic home. The government went to the courts and got a ruling that they didn't have to provide an alternative. So the Bedouins were in a hard place. Interesting, I read it in the newspapers as well, the continuation of Route 6 was halted indefinitely because of a lack of funding. So there was time to work out a solution, or at least have discussions. But in early May, a few weeks before we arrived, the Israeli government came and completely demolished 47 Bedouin homes. We saw that community, and I know Diane was very moved, as we all were, and we saw a few tents, not high-tech tents, not any protection against the elements, which a few of the Bedouins were living in around this site of demolition. Most of them had scattered to various places. Interestingly, our guide, the Bedouin guide, said that sometimes the Bedouins, if they have knowledge that the Israeli government is coming to demolish their home, they will demolish them themselves. I thought, an act of resistance. I had heard about a cousin of mine who jumped off of a roof while being chased by the Nazis in an act of resistance, in his wanting to take control. Well, not exactly here. The reason that Bedouins destroy their own homes when they know the Israeli government is coming to destroy them is because the Israeli government will bill them for the work in demolishing the home. And if they can demolish their own home, they don't have to worry about that bill. We went to the old city of Jerusalem, and we went through the Muslim quarter, and we saw instances where ultra-nationalist Jews are trying to buy property there, expand a property that Ariel Sharon wrote years ago, expand a synagogue. Again, it's very hard not to share the details because it's so fascinating, but hopefully we can do more later. We went and viewed this synagogue that was in the middle of a Palestinian, I don't know what you can't really call it, courtyard, a little area of Palestinian apartments, and spray painted in red on the Palestinian homes was a saying, it's price tag, Hilltop Youth, price tag, Hilltop Youth, an act of vandalism, an act of threat, an act that there's a price tag here and we're gonna get you and we're gonna get this home. We saw the way that the Israelis who participate in Jerusalem Day march and celebrate. They come through the Damascus Gate in the Muslim section, not the Jaffa Gate in the Israeli section. And indeed, weeks after we left Israel, there was a march with thousands, I read about it, thousands of Israelis, right-wing Israelis, accompanied by Ben-Gvir, the Minister of National Security, chanting death to the Arabs. We met a couple peace activists, and I want to talk about one because it resonated with me very personally. Ma'oz Inan is an entrepreneur in Israel. He is quite a character, and he built many years ago a guest house in Nazareth with an Arab partner. Beautiful guest house. We saw it. It's not in use anymore. And he also built a chain of hostels in Israel and beyond, and constructed a path through Israel a hiking path connecting various religious and historic sites. He was a peace activist, but he redoubled his efforts after October 7th when both his parents were murdered in the South. He's become quite a celebrity. He went to Vancouver and did a TED Talk with a Palestinian, captured the hearts and minds of many, including the Pope, and he, after that, had a visit with the Pope. What he said really is what touched me. He said his parents had planted the seeds of peace, and his parents had reminded him how important it was to work toward peaceful coexistence. Not as traumatic for sure, but it was my father, the Zionist, who fought for the state of Israel, who planted the seeds in me of understanding that criticizing a country you love is important when that country is on the wrong path. My father, I remember when I was little, we went to Israel, and he was very upset that Jewish Israelis were not learning Arabic, as was required when he was in school in Palestine. He said that was not a recipe for mutual coexistence and mutual respect. I don't remember the 1967 war. I was too young, but I remember talking to my dad in the years after, and he was not happy with the continued presence. And I'm just going to read something he wrote at my request a couple years before he died. In 1967, I observed the Six-Day War during which surrounding Arab nations attacked Israel as an American citizen. While I was relieved that Israel defended herself, in the war's aftermath, I became concerned with Israel's continued presence in the West Bank. Inevitably, occupation becomes oppressive on those occupied, as well as corrosive on the occupier. He commented repeatedly that Israel had strayed far from its roots of social Labor Party people. He abhorred Netanyahu, especially never forgiving him for inciting violence against Minister Rabin. I have to say, I am keenly aware that there have been transgressions, I would say on both sides, but by many parties. I know that about 1 million Jews were forcibly expelled from their homes in Arab countries. I know that the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem in 1943 communicated with Hitler and said how much he admired Hitler and admired his solution of eliminating all of the Jews in the world. I am deeply affected every time I read about an instance of anti-Semitism, and still having trouble sleeping some days after reading about a 12-year-old girl in France about a week ago who was beaten up brutally by 3 teenagers because she was Jewish and then gang raped. Sometimes these facts make me want to retreat, build a sort of gated community around my brain and my heart, and think only about myself, my family, my people. But there's a philosophy in the world of recovery, well, maybe elsewhere, but really that people in recovery adhere to, an understanding that you cannot control everything, but you must always focus on keeping your side of the street clean, owning bad choices and learning from them and moving forward. On this NIF trip, I felt, and this is not an overstatement, so privileged, so blessed, so transformed, meeting Jewish Israelis and others who are dedicated to making their side of the street, the Jewish Israeli side of the street, our side of the street, clean. Shabbat Shalom.